The wisdom books are not clearly all about wisdom, actually. They're summarized in this way because of convenience, perhaps. They fit the Jewish Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, files these books under the more general heading of Ketuvim, along with other books like the Chronicles, just the writings. Ketuvim just means the writings. And the writings might be a better way to summarize this, because what we have is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs here. Job is about a suffering righteous man and his discussions on why he's suffering. Psalms is a collection of hymns. Proverbs is a collection of wise sayings. Ecclesiastes are the teachings of someone who claims to have tried everything and concluded that it's empty. And finally, Song of Songs is a book of erotic love poetry. So again, there is some wisdom here, but there's also songs, and there's also intense theological discussions about evil, and there's also love poems. We'll begin with Job. The action, so-called action in Job, really occurs in the first couple chapters and a little bit in the end. In the first couple chapters, the setup is that Satan asks for the right to test Job, and God ends up stripping him of everything he has. He loses his children, his wealth, even his own health. Then the majority of the book is taken up by a number of speeches that either justify or question Job's sufferings. First between Job and his friends, and then finally between Job and God directly. It's probably dated from before the chronicler because of the way Satan is talked about, for instance, but it's possibly around the Persian era because we see Aramaic influences, again, that language, imperial language of the Persians. Job is similar to other ancient Near East traditions where people puzzle over suffering and justice, but it probably doesn't owe anything to them directly. There's not probably not the writer of Job's probably weren't reading these Egyptian texts in hand. I mean, these are really perennial themes. People have always thought about why do righteous people, why do good people suffer, right? This is a very common question that kind of resounds throughout much of human literature and much of human art and um, um, philosophy and theology, certainly. And of course, so Job is very rich with these theological considerations. So at the very heart of it, the very heart of Job's theology is this question: Is our piety, is human piety motivated by blessings? Do people do good because they receive good? Does the universe think about justice the way we do, or is it something far beyond us? And can we not quite understand how suffering and morality relate to each other? And clearly, Job sees this theology as a way of life. This is not people in ivory towers, debating an academic point, but people really grappling with intense suffering in the middle of life, in the middle of their very difficult practical circumstances, thinking about what this says about God, who God is, and how can God permit this? Can we question God? Can we defy God? Can we obey without questioning? What are the human possibilities in all this? The next book is Psalms. It is divided into 5 books, clearly divided into 5 books, but not so clearly why. What ties these together. The 5 may be a reflection of the Pentateuch, um, and there are various classifications. People have studied them and come up with various classifications. We'll just give some of them here. One major type, for instance, is called the Psalm of Thanksgiving. I think all of these basic types are either in individual or plural voices. Many of them use the I, right? I thank God. Some of them we thank God. But it's important to recognize that as psalms, even if it uses the I voice, they might have been sung or used in communal settings, right? And I guess vice versa too, right? People could read the communal worship on their own, certainly. Besides Psalms of Thanksgiving, we have Psalms of Lament, Psalms of Praise, liturgical Psalms, so Psalms used specifically for worship or um, festivals. We have royal Psalms focused on the king, wisdom Psalms, and then finally Torah Psalms focused on you know, the importance of the Torah, meditating on the Torah, keeping the Torah, the teaching of God and the law of God. We can translate it Torah multiple ways. There are lots of other ways to analyze the psalm too. Many academics have gotten into the original texts that might have formed them, the sources, the uses of the Psalter, the uses of the Psalms, how Psalms might have been used especially in different points in Israel's history or for different situations. Why there's a quite a lot of debate on why it's structured in these five parts. And then as far as the content, because there's so many Psalms and they're so varied, really they reflect kind of the entire Hebrew Bible. So we have the Deuteronomist and concerns that would be appropriate for the Deuteronomist, the Yahwist, right, the ancestral saga, the priestly source, David and Zion theology, wisdom theology. Many of these kind of various competing or complementary theologies are all reflected in the Psalms. And maybe if we choose one unifying theme from the Psalms, it would be the way that teaching or theology emerges from lived human experiences, right? What we could call spirituality. That as people live their lives and pursue their kind of religious instincts, and the theology arises in the muck or in the deeply personal reflections on the human experience, on the human condition. Next, we have the Proverbs, which is only very loosely organized into these kind of rough connections. There's not a single narrative arc or even a narrative arc at all sometimes. Two verses may not have it may not be clear what the connection between two verses right next to each other are. Still, generally, we have them organized by author. Once again, there are differences between the Hebrew and the Greek sources, and good reasons to doubt the supposed authors that are given, like Solomon especially. We're probably dealing with multiple sources and collections. It's important to mention probably one of the major themes, which is warning about. Well, okay, let's do this first. The mentions of foreign women and the fact that wisdom is seen as a feminine figure both suggest a kind of later date for one of the reasons we doubt Solomon wrote it, at least in their final form, because Solomon would not have been so focused, we presume, on foreign women, and also this idea of wisdom as a feminine embodied figure, as like almost a personality or character in her own right, are both later in the tradition that we see. So again, exile or post-exilic. And then, to focus more on the more anti-woman agenda part of it, the constant warnings about foreign women. It can be seen, from a modern perspective, as deeply misogynistic, and that is one way to think about it, certainly. But within the world of Proverbs itself, the audience and the authors, it's probably not meant to be directed against what we could consider biological or culturally gendered women, but more as a warning about foreign influence. So this ongoing kind of concern and theme we see echoing throughout the Old Testament about purity and about Israel's worship of only the God of Israel without being influenced by the customs of the peoples around them. And so women probably stands in here in Proverbs especially. The theology of Proverbs is pretty straightforward. It argues that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom on one hand, so fearing God is the wisest thing to do, and on the other hand, that if you act wisely, God will favor you, God will bless you. So the wisdom here, although we saw that the Deuteronomist sometimes had like snide things to say about wisdom, or was a little bit skeptical about how wisdom could help even evil ends, wisdom isn't opposed to the law, right? So the Proverbs don't seem to be as concerned or opposed to the law. The law gets actually important sections in the beginning and the end of the Proverbs. So wisdom or Proverbs sees itself as going hand in hand with the law. Proverbs can also be seen as a response to Job and Ecclesiastes, right? So Job, in thinking about God being beyond our understanding, right? That the universe does not answer to our justice, that God does not answer to our justice. Proverbs seems to argue very strongly that God does, that God is very just and God is very righteous in dealing with humanity, that if you act with wisdom and you act with righteousness, God can help you and bless you. And then Ecclesiastes suggests that wisdom is not very helpful in coming to lasting meaning in human life, and that wisdom can leave you desolate and is very limited, but in its ability to give you the blessings of a good life. But Proverbs seems to say almost exactly the opposite. That wisdom can lead to blessing. That following wisdom is the source, the best path, the easy, the straight path to the best life, to the blessed life. Okay, and so that leads us to Ecclesiastes, which is really a mysterious book. It's very quotable, but very few people really have read it and can we could say understand its themes because it's so deeply we could say cynical about the possibilities of human life. Right? We hinted at this with our discussion on Proverbs. We could generally organize it as following Solomon's speech, and then some themes about God's power, about how people should act in a wise way before God and before royals or officials, people with power, and then finally ending with skepticism about the possibility of wisdom or lasting gain or meaningful gain in this life, in human life. Many scholars of Ecclesiastes have suggested that when it references tiered bureaucracies, it's probably thinking about the Ptolemies, which is another successor kingdom of Alexander. They ruled from Egypt around 300 BCE, and so it could be from around that time. Um, the author, we could think about the author's motives in multiple ways. If the author is writing to the average um, Israelite, right? The author themselves takes on the pose of someone who's experienced and tasted everything. So they're at the top of this hierarchy. They're in the landed nobility where they're able to enjoy all kinds of delicacies and the good life based on the toil and suffering of the vast majority of others, presumably, possibly the author's readers. And so it could be a kind of kindness, trying to teach people who are in this, deeply repressive hierarchy how to find happiness, how to lean into the suffering and hopelessness and recognize the to grab fleeting moments of joy out of that. It could also be read as very cynical, teaching people to stay in their place um, and to recognize that it's hopeless, to fight against these kind of um, structures that lead to emptiness and vanity in all human pursuits. A third option is that the author is not actually writing for the poor at all, but writing for other people of leisure, other of the noble class, and saying, "Look, these are my experiments with pleasure and meaning in human life. This is what I found." And that the main message again in the end is that God is kind of um, fully in control, somewhat like Job, right? That people are totally helpless before the mysterious dictates of God, and that life is ultimately empty in a way that's much more chilling, I would say, than Job, because Job at least ends with God's response to Job, and Job has something to repent for, and then God blesses Job again. Here, the end is simply that there is no meaning, that everything is vanity of vanities. All you can do is squeeze the little bit of joy that you can out of those moments and try to face death in a brave way, in a dignified way, as all things continue to be empty in cycle after cycle under the sun. Finally, our last book is the Song of Songs, which goes by other names. Sometimes it's called the Song of Solomon because he's mentioned in the book. It says this is the song which is Solomon's. It sometimes uses Latin, canticle or canticle of canticles, meaning again Song of Songs, just Latin. The content of the book can be very surprising for people who think they know what the Bible has or what's in it, because it's very open expressions of sexual and erotic longing, desire, and joining. That is basically its content. Because of that, there has been some question always of whether it belongs. But you could say that this kind of question is somewhat rhetorical because throughout the ages, the resounding answer by both Jews and Christian interpreters is that yes, this absolutely belongs as sacred literature. This is not just common, smut, or, it's not for erotic titillation. It is a deep reflection on, well, we'll see, right? We'll see why is this um, love poetry about a man and a woman so important for Jews and Christians? The structure of it is that the man and the woman, basically we can see their basic cycles of pursuit, longing, pursuit, kind of breaking off and then reuniting. Okay, so there's a number of rounds of this throughout this poetry, throughout this kind of poetic interlude. It's not a clear narrative. There's not that clear of a narrative, but we do see this kind of separation, pursuit, separation, pursuit. Now, on to the central idea, well, okay, its source and its composition are mysterious. Let's say that it's hard to tell where they come from, but what it means has been generally pretty clearly agreed upon. From the Jewish perspective, it is God's relationship with Israel, right? And this is why I've been encouraging you to think about the covenant and these issues as a marriage, as a relationship. The rabbis and the Jewish interpreters have always loved this as God and Israel in love with each other, and this kind of interplay, this love, romantic love, as the best way to characterize it. Or and even again the back and forth, we could see this motion of exile and return, right? Again, another recurring theme in the Hebrew Bible, in the land, being chased out of land, brought out of slavery, going into exile, returning from exile again and again. The basic beats of the story. For Christians, of course, it will be slightly different, but perhaps not too surprisingly, God and Christ are understood as the male lover, the church or the individual Christian as the female, or even the soul as the female lover in this kind of story. Um, the major themes just are the intense, we could say the intense devotion, desire, longing between God and God's people, either way, as well as the alienation, in these cycles of separation and reunion, um, being forced apart, the obstacles are surmounted, and then finally love is reached again. So these kind of cycles of love and loss within the God and humanity. And that ends our discussion on the writings or the wisdom literature.